Good evening, everyone. A big welcome and thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. We have a tremendous event ahead. My name is Bianca Mageni. I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which is one of the organizations that's presenting this event. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that many of us are gathered here today on Indigenous land. And today I'm speaking to you from Montreal, Tiohtià:ke, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations. I recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the land that I am on. I want to thank our co-organizers, the Nagasaki Hiroshima Day Coalition, who have done an incredible amount and without whom this event would simply not have been able to take place. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, Science for Peace, Les Artistes pour la Paix, Peace Quest, as well as media sponsor Canadian Dimension, who will be live streaming to their page most likely in a few minutes. And that's Facebook/CDN Dimension. I also want to extend just a huge appreciation to more than 50 groups, both in Canada and internationally, that are supporting this event tonight. For the full list, please visit www.foreignpolicy.ca/nuclear-ban, and you can find the link to that in the chat. Momentum is high. Momentum is high for Canada to sign on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it's amazing to see this turnout. There are hundreds and hundreds of you in the Zoom chat right now. And I'm asking that for those of you who are on social media, we'd love for this to be interactive. So please help us to get the word out about our desire for Canada to sign on to the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty. The hashtag is #NuclearBan and #CanadianPoly, #CDNPoly. And you can also retweet from Foreign Policy_C accounts to spread the word. This is also a moment to take action. There's an incredible tool that Peace Quest has put out called Does Your MP Support the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty? And you can send a letter with this tool. We've also put this tool in the chat. So you can take a look at that and take action. So the chat is open, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. At home, we're excited about an exchange of ideas here in the chat. And we just have the very basic request that you keep your comments civil. Any racism or sexism or otherwise hateful or harmful commentary is of course not welcome. And we would have to remove anyone from the chat who doesn't respect this. So chat to us. Again, my name is Bianca Mageni. I'm here representing the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and our goal really is to challenge unjust foreign policy measures. And we aim to bridge the gap between the perception and the reality of Canada's role in the world. And you can find out more about what we do at foreignpolicy.ca. So we're holding this event because nuclear weapons constitute one of the most serious threats facing humanity. Nuclear explosions over cities would instantly kill tens of millions. Even just 1%, a fraction use of the existing nuclear weapons would disrupt the global climate and would threaten billions with starvation and nuclear famine. So with the 50th ratification, this historic ratification of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons by Honduras, the treaty will become international law, prohibiting nations from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, transferring, processing, stockpiling, using or even threatening to use nuclear weapons. But Canada has not signed on to this treaty that becomes international law on January 22nd. And we're not okay with this. At today's historic event, we're bringing together Setsuko Thurlow, who survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, with 3 members of parliament to ask the question, why hasn't Canada signed on to the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty? Unfortunately, Liberal MP Hedy Fry is no longer able to be here with us. A sudden scheduling conflict resulted in her last-minute withdrawal from tonight's event. We requested a video message as replacement, but that was not made available either. This is genuinely disappointing, but in some ways does further underscore the importance of this event. And, we were really hoping to hear from a Liberal representative to better understand their position and to gain insight into why just 2 weeks ago they voted against 118 countries that reaffirmed support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Trudeau government voted against holding the conference to negotiate the treaty in 2016 and failed to attend the conference at which 2/3 of the world's countries were represented. And all of this, incredibly, has been done while the Liberal government have recently said that they believe in a, quote, world free of nuclear weapons, and that Canada, quote, unequivocally supports global nuclear disarmament. Additionally, the Canadian government say that they're seeking to advance a feminist foreign policy and an international rules-based order. And yet we know that the TPNW has been dubbed the first feminist law on nuclear weapons, recognizing the disproportionate impacts of nuclear weapons on women and on girls. And additionally, the TPNW strengthens international rule-based order by making weapons that, as Setsuko and so many others have said, have always been immoral, also illegal under international law. So we're seeing a very big gap in terms of what the Liberals are saying and what they're doing on nuclear policy. And now that I've got that out of my system, it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce our speakers. And we're going to be hearing from each of them and then taking questions from the audience. And so I'm just going to ask that if you have questions to just put them in the Q&A chat box. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce renowned activist Setsuko Thurlow. She was 13 years old when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. She began speaking out against nuclear weapons in 1954 after arriving for studies in the United States. She's continued to speak out. She continued to speak out after moving to Canada, and in 1975 founded the organization Hiroshima Nagasaki Relived, which is actually the forerunner of today's Hiroshima Nagasaki Day Coalition, who are hosting this event. And this organization commemorates the first atomic bombings at the Peace Garden at Toronto City Hall every August. Setsuko testified before the United Nations about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and participated in the long development and ratification process led by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, that led to the banned treaty. In 2017, she jointly accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of ICAN and spoke to the whole world about the urgent need to abolish nuclear weapons. Welcome, Setsuko.
Thank you. Do I start?
Yeah.
I am passionate about the historic moment before us. The treaty on the was entered into force. This means that for the first time, nuclear weapons under international law. The treaty categorically bans nuclear weapons and in nuclear weapon use, threat of use, testing, development, production, and property comprehensively shift the narrative from the military doctrine of military and environmental consequences of nuclear weapon use. This is a revolutionary close to our goal for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. When I learned this, I cried tears of joy. I found myself speaking to who lost their lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I was immediate with those beloved souls. My sister-in-law, little 4-year-old nephew, aunts, cousins, my schoolmates, innocent who perished. I was reporting to the dead with them because they paid the ultimate price for their precious lives. Like many survivors, I had made a vow that they'd be invincible and to warn the world about the danger of nuclear weapons, to make sure human beings would suffer as we have suffered. I made a vow for nuclear until my decades-long struggle, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, national law. I have a tremendous sense of accomplishment. For I know other survivors share these emotions, whether we're surviving or test survivors from South Pacific Island nations, Kazakhstan, Australia, and Algeria, or survivors from uranium mining state, Congo, or those who have been victimized by the who continue to develop more horrendous weapons. Prepare to repeat nuclear massacre, far more devastating than the atomic bomb in my hometown, Hiroshima. For the victims and survivors, this initial success with the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapon is tremendously uplifting. I celebrate this world who have been victimized and still raise their voices survive. We also celebrate with those people who recognize the ultimate evil of nuclear weapons, instruments of homicide that have kept the entire world hostage for all these. We celebrate with the global community of anti-nuclear access this city. In the abolish nuclear weapons, I can lay the groundwork, the deed of diplomacy and activism to achieve something is passing importance. I also want to acknowledge how movable Hibaksha are identified by name. This is the first time in international law that we have been so recognized. We share this recognition with others throughout the world, with those who have suffered radioactive harm from over 2,000 nuclear tests across the globe, with those who have suffered from uranium mining and from secret experimentations. The treaty recognizes that indigenous people have been proportionately affected by the production of nuclear weapons. We in the Hibaksha and indigenous communities uniquely understand that not only the use of nuclear weapons in war, but also the testing and production of nuclear weapons cause death and unspeakable suffering through invisible radioactive contamination. And here the treaty recognizes that women and girls are more susceptible to the effects of radiation, that they are gendered impatient to radioactive violence. I am also moved to acknowledge the positive obligations of the treaty as well, such as victim assistance and environmental remediation, which will be a hallmark for taking responsibility for the intergenerational effects of radiation. It is vitally important that we all understand that the nuclear age will continue far beyond the nuclear weapon age. We will need to contain and care for radioactive materials into the far future. Radioactive contamination still casts its deadly shadow in Canada, as our own government played a central role in the development of the world's first nuclear weapons, considered crude by today's standard of destruction. As part of my work with the ICANN to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the nuclear massacres in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I wrote letters to 197 heads of state, urging them to ratify the ban treaty. Of course, this included the letter of Minister Trudeau. I reminded him of the uranium ore mined in Northwest Territories by El Dorado, a Canadian government crown corporation. For him, the El Dorado at its refinery in Port Hope, Ontario, processed uranium ore from Canada and Congo used in the Manhattan Project to create the world's first atomic bombs. It is vitally important that Canadian citizens recognize Canada's role in the development of nuclear weapons. This history is not lost on Indigenous Canadians. In August of 1998, a delegation from Delin to Hiroshima and expressed their apology for their role in the creation of the atomic bomb. These people consisted of the Dene hunters and trappers who were employed by El Dorado to carry sacks of uranium ore on their backs for transport to El Dorado refinery in Port Hope. Many Dene had themselves died of cancer as a result of their exposure to radiation, leaving Delin a village of widows. Surely the Canadian government should make its own acknowledgement of Canada's central contribution project that created of the atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And especially today, during this time of great reckoning of systemic racism, it is sickening to understand Prime Minister Mackenzie King's relief that it was the Japanese who suffered. After hearing that the uranium-type bomb had leveled Hiroshima, he wrote in his diary, "It is fortunate that the use of the bomb should have been upon the Japanese rather than the white races of Europe." A disturbing statement, but not surprising, as Prime Minister Mackenzie King was a principal architect of Japanese Canadian intent during the Second World War. In my letter to Prime Minister Trudeau, I have requested acknowledge Canada's critical role in the creation of nuclear weapons and express a statement that for the death and suffering they caused in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I also urge to work toward the ratification of treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The letter was written in June, but I have yet to receive an acknowledgement from the government that my letter was even received, let alone proper response. I therefore am delighted and welcome this to discuss with members of Parliament tonight about how we can enact legislation on nuclear weapon abolition and how to work to ratify the treaty. The treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons have opened a new door. Passing through it, begin a new chapter in a struggle. The beginning of the end of nuclear weapon have arrived. Let us step through the doorway now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Setsuko, for your heartfelt presentation. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for expressing what an incredible, how incredible this milestone is to you and what it means to you, and just your tremendous contributions to the struggle for nuclear abolition, and also for reminding us of the racism, of the violence. Your perspective is utterly priceless, and I'm looking so forward to hearing from you more during the question and answer period. Our next speaker this evening is MP Heather McPherson. Heather McPherson is the NDP MP for Edmonton Strathcona. She's the Deputy House Leader of the NDP. She's the NDP Critic for International Development and the Deputy Critic for Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Before I start, I should recognize that we're now in these Zoom worlds where we are all on different parts of the country. So I'm currently located on Treaty 6 territory, which is of course the home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that. And I want to start by thanking Ms. Thurlow for her comments. It is It is so important to have her voice be part of this conversation, and I feel, probably like many of the people on this Zoom call, that we could sit and listen to her for the entire duration of the program. Her knowledge, her lived experience is so important. And I think it's particularly important to hear her talk about how Canada is implicated and how our actions currently and in the past have implicated us. The racism, the deep colonialism that we have seen continues. The echoes of that continue on to this day. The impacts on Indigenous people, the impacts on women and girls. I think it's vital that we acknowledge and we recognize those impacts as we look to finding a way to convince our government to actually move on nuclear disarmament. I'd also like to thank the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and, of course, the Hiroshima Nagasaki Day Coalition for inviting me. Thank you, Bianca, for hosting us for this evening's events. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party who've joined us today. I am not going to pull my punches. I am utterly appalled that the Liberal Party did not choose to send a representative to this event. It's not surprising that the Conservatives did not send a representative, but it is appalling. I'm sorry, it is appalling that the Liberal Party did not feel that they should send somebody that would give us some insight into their position on failing to sign the United Nations Nuclear Ban Treaty. I think it speaks volumes that they're unwilling to defend their position publicly. So to begin, I'll just say the very obvious thing that nuclear weapons pose a significant threat to global peace and security, and they are an existential threat for humanity. I know, and I can assure you that all New Democrats know, that the vast majority of Canadians want their country, want Canada to be a force for global peace. The majority of Canadians want to see Canada reclaim our place or take anew our place on the world stage as peacekeepers, as conveners, as, you know, a medium power country that has typically punched above its weight on the world stage. You know, we've had this history of being able to influence other countries to be better global citizens, and we have lost that moral high ground in recent decades. And I think that the vast majority of Canadians would like to see us be able to bring that back and take that role that we should have back again. I think that Canadians see part of that role as us signing on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. You know, we know what happened 75 years ago. We know the horror of nuclear war. We didn't need to hear it from Ms. Thurlow, but we are very, very honored that we got to. But the fact that you know, 80,000 lives were lost in an instant, that thousands more in the subsequent months and years were lost, and the fact that we've been living with the threat of nuclear war ever since is absolutely appalling. In January 2020, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved the hands of the doomsday clock to 100 seconds to midnight in part because of the existential threat of nuclear war. Also, the added threat of climate change and climate crisis, and the combined impacts of our planet with limited resources, and having the power to use nuclear war as increasing discord happens around the world is something that we all need to be deeply, deeply concerned about. And the threat of nuclear war and nuclear arms are increasing as we see more and more agreements collapsing, as nuclear armed states develop new systems, as conflicts between nuclear armed states rise. And meanwhile, governments are spending trillions each year on weapons and militaries, and over 1 billion small arms and light weapons are circulating worldwide, causing, you know, deaths in the hundreds of thousands of people each year. So again, I'll say nuclear weapons are an existential threat to humanity, and in an increasingly uncertain global environment, it is more important than ever that we eradicate these weapons. I can tell you that the NDP has long opposed nuclear weapons, and we must ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again. For decades, New Democrats have been one of the only national political parties that have been advocating for peace and disarmament. The Conservatives have been pretty actively worked against disarmament, but the Liberals have played a bit of a cynical game of politics on issues like nuclear disarmament. In 2017, they said that their goal was nuclear disarmament was their goal, but they've also called negotiations on nuclear weapon ban treaties useless, and they've refused to take part. And they've put their weight against progress, which empowers leaders like Donald Trump and other bad faith actors. And the Liberal about face, I guess, on nuclear weapons, we know that they supported disarmament when they were in the opposition. They just don't now that they're in government. That this is problematic, that this is really concerning. The Liberal government's boycott of the ban treaty diplomatic process flies in the face of the 2010 motion in the House of Commons, which called for negotiations for a nuclear weapons convention, and which was adopted unanimously in the House of Commons. The motion's often referred to by many of the stakeholders that are doing this important work. The Liberals refuse to support the nuclear ban treaty. It also goes against Liberal Party policy. At their 2016 Winnipeg Policy Convention and at their 2018 Policy Convention, the Liberal membership adopted resolutions in support of nuclear disarmament. Now, I have to say that I'm following a long line of New Democrats who have been doing this work. In our caucus currently, Paul Dewar's been doing this work, but Linda Duncan, who was the Member of Parliament in Edmonton Strathcona riding before me, was a vocal supporter of disarmament. Ellen Laverdiere, Paul Dewar, there is a long line of NDP members of Parliament whose work I'm following. I have the great pleasure of being able to hear from and learn from Doug Roach, who is also one of the preeminent voices on disarmament. So we do have a proud history of promoting this, of working for disarmament. I continue that tradition. I will continue to try to move our government. I will continue to try to work with all parties across the aisles to ensure that the Canadian government is actually fulfilling its responsibility to disarm, to sign on to treaties that work towards that. I will stop my comments there, but I will just finish, I guess, by saying that this is a unique moment in time, that the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the importance of investing in people, the importance of investing in human security rather than bolstering military security. And it's become increasingly clear that societies in armed conflict and those that have prioritized investments in military are not as able to address the pandemic, are not as able to respond to the public health and education needs that the current situation requires. So it's becoming clear more and more that we need to move beyond a neoliberal agenda. We need to move towards we need more than just the empty words from this government. We must show leadership on this important issue. There's lots of things I think we can do. I'm happy in the question and answers to talk about what some of my ideas on what we could do going forward to ensure a safe and nuclear-free world for all of us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your insights and just reminding us of the existential threat that nuclear weapons pose. Thank you for your commitment as well, and for reminding us that people living in Canada really want Canada to be a force for peace and human rights globally. I also just wanted to thank you and also our next speaker, Alexis. Both of you had conflicting parliamentary committees that came up, but chose to join civil society, this forum and the 50 organizations endorsing this to pressure Canada to sign on to the nuclear ban treaty. And so I'm just so grateful to you for your presence here. Our next speaker of the evening is MP Alexis Brunel-Duceppe. Alexis Brunel-Duceppe is the Bloc Québécois MP for Lac-Saint-Jean. He's the vice chair of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, as well as of the Standing Committee on National Defense. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much. First, I'd like to thank the organizer of the event. I'm glad speaking here today, even if it's my second language, so be gentle with me, please. The idea of nuclear weapons being used is truly terrible. The fact that they have been used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a stain in human history that will never be erased. We must remember the victims so that nuclear weapons are never used again. We must also recognize, as others have done, the impact of the health of those living near test sites, in particular Indigenous people. Humanity faces many threats. Climate change is forcing us to rethink our economy models and emphasize the need for international cooperation. A more immediate is the recent COVID pandemic, which also forces us to adapt in unprecedented ways within a short time frame. But we should not lose sight of the threat posed by nuclear weapons, especially at a time of rising international tensions. For a long time, the nuclear threat was considered the main threat to humanity. If we don't hear about it as much as before, it's not because the risk has disappeared, but because of these new threats that I just mentioned. But the risk is real. Even if proponents of the mad theory tell us that nuclear weapons won't be used of the fear of mutual annihilation, we can never know for sure. Or at least as long as there are nuclear weapons, we won't be able to know. A nuclear war would be the most catastrophic event in human history and a self-inflicted one. There is hope. Hope for a world without nuclear weapons, a world where no president or dictator can destroy by pushing a button. The Bloc Québécois, we support the idea of getting rid of nuclear weapons for good. This is why we support the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Obviously, we know Canada is not leaning towards the signing the treaty. The NATO alliance, of which Canada is a member, sees itself as a nuclear alliance and has stated that it's committed to remain so as long as nuclear weapons exist. It might seem depressing to that, but there is a glimpse of hope here. They say there will be a nuclear alliance as long as nuclear weapons exist. So even NATO acknowledges that the elimination of nuclear weapons is not impossible. We should continue to work toward this ultimate goal. But there's also other action that can be taken now to reduce the risk posed by nuclear weapons. First, we must encourage the incoming Biden administration to rejoin the nuclear agreement with Iran. Iran was complying before the US withdrawal and can be made to cooperate again if the new US administration shows good faith. It's in everyone's interest. Second, we must encourage Russia and the United States to agree on an extension of the New START treaty, which limits the number of deployed and ready-to-use nuclear weapons. The treaty still allows for enough nuclear weapons to be deployed to destroy both countries many times, but it was still a step in the right direction. In that direction are less nuclear weapons. This treaty is set to expire in 2021. Third, we should make clear to North Korea that the international norms set by the Non-Proliferation Treaty cannot be broken without consequences. The North Korean people are suffering so much under the brutal dictatorship of Kim Jong-un, a regime that chooses to invest in rockets rather than to feed its own people. The international community must continue to put pressure on Kim Jong-un's regime while also engaging in constructive dialogue if the North Koreans are serious about denuclearization. Fourth, Canada should publicly condemn the development of small, more usable nuclear weapons. Small nuclear weapons are as dangerous as bigger ones, if not more, because they encourage the idea that they can be used on a battlefield for a specific objective. This idea is very dangerous. We should never again use nuclear weapons, whatever the size, whatever the reason. Finally, and I believe this is the most obvious step, Canada must act to better manage its nuclear waste. Don't get me wrong, peaceful nuclear energy production can sometimes be necessary when no cleaner option exists. However, waste from the civil nuclear industry can be harmful to health and to the environment. Moreover, if nuclear waste was to fall into the wrong hands, let's say terrorists, for example, they could be used to build dirty bombs that would kill and injure thousands, abroad and even at home. So, there's work to do. Eliminating the risk posed by a nuclear weapon requires us to eliminate nuclear weapons. The TPNW is a product of this realization. The challenge is big, but the objective is worth it. Bequeath our children a world without nuclear weapons. Nations must therefore cooperate to address this. In fact, the great challenges of our time, climate change, the COVID pandemic, and the threat posed by nuclear weapons cannot be addressed by one country alone. They require global cooperation, not selfish competition. So let us start a new age of international cooperation that will put an end to the atomic age. Thank you very much, and sorry for my accent. I'm practicing English and I'm going to be better next time.
Oh, merci beaucoup, Alexis, pour votre discours. That was a great presentation. Please, no need to apologize for your English. We're just very grateful to you for sharing your great concerns, you know, and these geostrategic roadblocks and choices that Canada has made, but how, you know, how big these challenges are, but why it's really worth it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you in the discussion later on. So our next speaker this evening, our next and final speaker this evening is Elizabeth May. Elizabeth May has been the Green Party MP for Saanich Gulf Islands in BC since 2011 and is the Green Party parliamentary leader in the House of Commons. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Et je veux dire quelque chose à mon ami Alexis, très bien fait. Excellent. Pour quelqu'un de Bloc Québécois, c'est un grand honneur. It's really a big honor. I hope all of you know in parliamentary terms that somebody, yes, Alexis, it's very rare to hear a Bloc Québécois member speak English at all, and you spoke so well. Anyway, I wanted to start by acknowledging the territory that I'm on here. I'm in Vancouver Island in my riding on the traditional territory of the Wasanic First Nation. The Wasanic people have taken care of this land for millennia, and I raise my hands to you in their tradition. Haishka Siam, the language is Senchothan. Haishka Siam meaning all honor, and thanks to all of you for being here. And when I say all of you, I've been amazed to look at the 300 people participating in this very important discussion. I want to acknowledge that in the group of people who are watching and listening, we could have a major conference because there are keynote speakers who are not getting to speak today. I want to say Mary Wynne Ashford is here with us, and virtually, of course, the Honorable Doug Roche, to whom Heather made reference, our former ambassador for disarmament, and so many leaders from civil society, from Voice of Women for Peace, from Pugwash, from all kinds of wonderful organizations, including, of course, our sponsor, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Speaking on behalf of the Green Party, and having been in Parliament when the negotiations on the treaty to abolish nuclear weapons, when those negotiations first started, I was on my feet in Parliament on a regular basis to ask, between 2015 and 2019, to ask the Liberals why Canada was boycotting the negotiations. We were sitting at a table as observers, never negotiating to get this treaty forward. And then when the treaty succeeded in the completion of negotiations, we didn't sign it. And now, as enough nations have signed it and ratified it, such that we know it will enter into force early in 2021, Canada remains not only on the sidelines, but just not participating, not helping, not doing what we should do. Now, in the absence of a Liberal member of Parliament here, I'll share with all of you what it was they said in response in Parliament over these many years, because their excuses don't hold water at all. One excuse has been, well, Canada, and this is their main one, Canada doesn't have nuclear weapons. We're not a nuclear weapons state. There's no role for us here. You know, in the Ottawa process that led to the Landmines Treaty, we weren't a country that manufactured or used landmines either. But the process, of course, that won a Nobel Peace Prize that led to the treaty to ban landmines is called the Ottawa process. It is to Canada's great credit that we played a key role in working to eliminate the threat and the scourge of landmines. And for us to use that pathetic excuse, there's no excuse, for not stepping up and doing what we can to support the abolition of nuclear weapons. I grew up under the threat of the mushroom cloud. My mother was very active in the movement of people all around the world to get a treaty to ban the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. I grew up warning the other children in kindergarten that they shouldn't eat the snow because of strontium-90. It's not much of a mystery why I would end up being an active environmentalist. These issues are linked, of course, because they are the two current threats that threaten the annihilation of our human civilization. As a matter of fact, the 1988 conference in Toronto, which was the first global conference on the climate issue, opened with the words, quote, "Humanity is conducting an unintended, uncontrolled, globally pervasive experiment whose ultimate consequences could be second only to global nuclear war." So that's where these threats rest. The greater threat to survival of life on Earth being nuclear weapons, and a close second in the race of the horsemen of apocalypse comes the climate emergency. Now is the moment to reawaken a new generation to the threat of nuclear war. With the Dr. Strangelove, who is still strangely holed up in the White House, we have taken steps towards midnight to undo the good work of the era of Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, to start talking about nuclear proliferation again as though it was a smart thing to do. I want to make it very clear that from the point of view of the Green Party of Canada, there's only one reason for Canada to stay in NATO, and that's to get NATO to support disarmament. If we can't support nuclear disarmament in every multilateral organization to which we belong, then we should leave those multilateral organizations and get to work on the side of peace and disarmament and a permanent path to a future for our children and for our grandchildren. So I'm very honored to join with my colleagues from Parliament, very honored to join with those who have done such great work, so many of you on this call, in this, the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let us not be silent, let us not be complacent, and let us realize that now is the time to finally get around to banning the bomb. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that rousing call to action, and just, you know, just the need for this critical work on disarmament by any means. And also want to thank you for taking action in Parliament and for raising the 50th ratification during question period in the House of Commons. Looking very, very forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. And so, with that, with the sort of opening statements, we're now going to be moving on to the Q&A portion of the evening. I'm going to ask all the panelists to switch their cameras back on, as we will all be participating in this. There have been lots and lots of questions that have been submitted both in advance and during, and so we'll try and get through as many as we can, time allowing. And so the questions can be directed either at individuals or at panelists. And I'm just going to jump right in. So the first question is from Anton Wagner, and it is directed first at Sissoko and then to other MPs. And the question is, what can Canadians do to pressure politicians to discuss the UN ban treaty in Parliament. So Setsuko, I'll ask you to answer first, and then if the rest of you could jump in after that.
What, asking me what we can do? Well,
Is Setsuko no longer on the call? Oh, no, I can see
all
you.
those
Would you like me to repeat the question? I can't hear you.
oh, ask me the question again.
Yeah, sure. So the question is from Anton Wagner, and it's, what can Canadians do to pressure politicians to discuss the UN ban treaty in Parliament?
Well, the only thing is to pressure the government, the people who are feeling the urgency of the issue. Well, don't stay silent, right on, and try to communicate. You may be disappointed, like I have been. And the response, stop it. We have to continuously knocking on the door. But we have to come up with some creative method of trying to get some conversation going. And this is why we are meeting. We have the politicians here. They know the inside situation. We want their help so ours can be heard. I know hundreds of people, individuals and organizations have written to Ottawa. Nobody have received the response. That is totally unacceptable. If this is democracy, they have to show they are listening to the voices of people. Well, Anton, we just have to keep what we have been doing. Maybe we can come up tonight with some creative ideas. We want to hear that. But so disappointing. I thought Canada have had such a proud history, legacy as a peace builder. I have heard great things about this country before I came and after I came.
Thank you.
Like when Mr. Trudeau, okay.
Oh, no, I'm
stop,
sorry.
right?
There's a bit of a delay. I thought you were through. Please continue.
Oh, I just wanted to point out some of the great things that Canada has done, like in 1978 at the United Nations, Mr. Trudeau's speech on strategy of suffocation. I happened to be there. I heard it. I was so impressed by that. I thought he courage. In United States, he could be that open and spoke his mind. Too bad his son doesn't have that. And then I remember Canada was capable of making the nuclear weapon, but it chose to become another nuclear weapon state. And by mid-80s, Canada would remove the weapon from American nuclear weapon from Canadian soil. That was another courageous thing. And of course, Mr. Axworthy, he did a tremendous job working with the organization. And he became so internationally famous. He went to Japan, he made some lectures, emphasized the importance of strong collaboration between the government, NGOs. And that appreciated Japanese government and activists. And this year, to commemorate International Day of Peace, I can the open letter and for the countries to ratify the treaty. And 54 past world leaders signed that petition. And 6 of them, Canadian leaders like Mr. Chrétien, John Turner, and Axworthy, and defense ministers, Bill Graham and Jean-Jacques Blade and Mr. McCallum. Well, it's good for us to be reminded that we have had some background, but in spite of that, the current government is mute, invisible at the UN, and that's heartbreaking. This has to change. And leaders, the politicians, you have to help us to make our voices listened to. That's it.
Thank you for that call to action. Would anyone else like to jump in on that? I'll just follow my screen. Alexi.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for all those words. I appreciate it, and I heard it. So yeah, to answer the question, the first question we have, well, events like this are a perfect example of what citizen can do. And you know, there's a lot of people who are present with us right now, and people can, you know, how you say that in English, s'engager, engage in those organizations to help. And as a normal citizen, obviously you can also write to your member of parliament, you know, email to MP's office. We're reading it, and often we respond to it. So it's another way, and it is one way to raise awareness about this important issue. So write to your MPs. Don't be shy. Write to us. And we'll respond, and we'll be there for you. So we're here tonight. I mean, it's an example again. There are also the usual letter to the editors and the social media. Use the social media. So this is all kind of ways you can be implicated, and you can make your voice, you know, be heard. So don't be shy. That's what I say. Don't be shy, and use those tools.
Thank you, Alexi. Elizabeth, you also had your hand.
Yeah, just in addition to everything that's been said, we need to make this more of a media issue. We need the Trudeau Liberals to feel vulnerable. They're coasting on the reputation, as Setsuko has said, of what we used to be. We used to be a country of peacekeepers. We're 63rd in the world in our contribution now to peacekeeping operations. We've become a country that has a significant economic sector in arms trade, the sale of weapons to countries like Saudi Arabia, to Turkey that used its drones for the Azerbaijan to attack the people of Armenia. We are up to our eyeballs in blood money. And we need to call it out in the media and make the Liberals feel vulnerable.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Heather.
Yeah, I agree with both of my colleagues. There is a lot we can do. Working with civil society, as Alexis was saying, is vital. You know, there are groups that are doing this work, like what we're doing here today. The government doesn't want us talking about these issues, because if they can get away with not acting on this, they will get away with not acting on this. They will try to find ways to dodge responsibility for this. So we do have you know, using public engagement, using tools to engage the community is fundamental, I think. I totally agree with Elizabeth when she talks about the militarization of our Canadian government. You know, we are looking at a moment in time where Global Affairs Canada gave, I believe the number was $40 million in support for Yemen in aid support, and yet forgave 600 to 800 million for arms to Saudi Arabia. So the same arms that are killing the Yemenis, and we're giving a fraction of support to the Yemenis for that. Like, it's absurd. But the other thing I will say too is that there are lots of opportunities for parliamentarians to also bring this up in the House that is not, you know, we don't have as much space in that room as the Conservatives and the Liberals do, but we do have space on committee. I work very, very well with Alexis on the Human Rights Committee. We work together on the Foreign Affairs Committee. There's lots of opportunities within committees. We also have the opportunity to bring up opposition days. I know in 2018, sorry, the NDP used one of their opposition days to talk about this. There are tools that we can use, and we do need to work together. And you know, right now on my screen, I have Elizabeth, myself, and Alexis. So it looks like a good team that can move this forward. Move this forward.
Just so people know, the Greens don't yet have a right to sit on any committee. I'm not allowed to be a member of any committee. Neither are the Greens allowed to put forward opposition day motions, but we certainly appreciate it when our colleagues do, so we have some chance to say something. I get one question, not even once a week do I get a question in question period. So it's a little harder to use the time, but I use it to make sure we raise the issue of why we need to support this treaty.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions about NATO. So I'll try and put a few of them forward in a few different ways. So the first one is from Julia Clark. How can Canada move forward with supporting the nuclear ban treaty while also demonstrating a commitment to NATO? Is there a way for both, or is it a matter of choice between nuclear disarmament and our commitment to NATO? Some of you have already touched upon this, but any elaboration would be greatly appreciated. I see, yeah, Elizabeth and then Alexi.
I'll be super brief. I don't think we can stay in NATO unless we also sign on to the treaty, right? We need to make it clear we need nuclear disarmament, and if we're going to stay in NATO, which I think is a big if, it should only be on the condition that we make it clear where we stand in the world.
Thank you, Alexi.
Well, you know, we have to be a leader somehow, and being a leader sometimes it's difficult because you have to take difficult decision. It's not black or white. We have to, you know, we have to be a leader. We need collaboration. We have to show that collaboration is possible. So we have to go through our allies that are, you know, United States, UK, France, but we have to go to countries that aren't our allies, like Russia. That's how you're going to be a leader. Not only talk to our allies. We have to build bridges with countries that normally are not considered as our allies. So that's how I think it's possible. But about the question about NATO, the thing is, as I said in my speech, NATO think that ultimately there'll be no longer nuclear weapons. So we have to make a statement on that and to be a leader again. We've been a leader. Canada has been a leader for peace. There's a tradition about it, but now I think, you know, I was talking about don't be shy. But we're now Canada is shy to talk about it, and maybe it's time to change that.
I'll just really quickly add in, Bianca, that I think that's exactly it, is that we used to play a role moving our allies and our non-traditional partners, I guess. We used to bring them along. You know, we used to have this convening role where we could actually bring that dialogue closer to where there was an important role for us in NATO. We played that role of ensuring that was recognized, and we're not playing that role anymore. In fact, we're pulling the opposite direction. I don't think Canadians realize how far we've fallen.
Thank you. Okay, so just two more on that subject. So we have an assertion from Tamara Lawrence that's, sort of part of a question around NATO impeding nuclear disarmament and stating explicitly that nuclear weapons remain central to its defense. We also have a question from Peggy Mason, who asks, in June 2018, the Standing Committee on National Defense made a unanimous Liberal NDP Conservative recommendation that Canada, on an urgent basis, take a leadership role within NATO and beginning the work necessary for achieving the NATO goal of creating the conditions for a world free of nuclear weapons. While the Government of Canada has stated it agrees with this recommendation, to date, no such dialogue has been initiated in NATO. Now that Joe Biden is president-elect, what steps will your party be taking to ensure that the Government of Canada takes concrete action in accordance with this unanimous recommendation? So I guess this question would have been easier for Hetty Fry to answer. But if any of you have any comments on that, let me know before I move on.
I want to make sure I give a shout out right now as we look forward to the new administration in the United States, Joe Biden, president-elect. And I want the shout out is to Doug Roach. Doug has a book that's coming out soon, and I had the privilege of reading it in galleys, which will help focus the attention of the Canadian government on the opportunities that are now being created on climate action, on human rights, and specifically on nuclear disarmament. So I think that if we get the opportunity to talk up this angle, right now the Canadian media is very interested in what does the Biden presidency mean for Canada. Let's start talking nuclear disarmament in that lens.
Thank you. So the next question that we have is from Paul Meyer. Paul's question: when the Canadian government shirks its responsibility to justify its position on the TPNW as reflected by Hetty Fry's absence today, what do MPs believe is the best way to hold the government to account? Alexei?
Well, we have to have the debate in the House. That's the first thing. If we don't have a debate, we cannot ask for the government to be how do you say that in English? I don't know. Sorry, but you understand what I mean. My Liberal colleague, the Honourable Hetty Fry, who's not there today, I'm sure she has a good reason, but she has to speak up to our caucus, to our caucus meeting, to convince her colleague and put this on the agenda. Conservative needs to engage too. We know Conservative loves gun and all sort of weapons, but nuclear weapons should be off limit. So they have to engage the debate too. Even we should put partisan politics aside when it comes to nuclear weapons. We are talking about one of the greatest threats about humanity. Let's not play dangerous game and focus on how we can solve this problem instead. So the first thing about it is to have the debate, and then we have to. And I'm sure there's a lot of Liberal MPs and there's a lot of Conservative MPs that agree with us tonight. But let's them talk to their caucus, ask them to talk to their caucus, and have the debate.
And I think the other thing too, and I said it earlier, is committees. This is where we have more, it's a minority government. We have the ability to bring forward things in committees that we can't necessarily bring forward in the House. One thing I wanted to just add to that though, is I do think that there's a bit of a concern that I have right now that COVID has been so overwhelming, has been such a massive focus of our work, as it should be. It's been, of course, an unprecedented thing. But what I worry about is as we look at the recovery, as we come out of COVID, have we lost the thread in terms of some of those fundamentally important issues we need to be moving forward, like disarmament, like climate change, some of these issues that it's really hard to get airtime in the House for, which is why another reason why I say committees might be one of those places that we can. It's so vital that we don't drop all of those things, because fundamentally they didn't go away on March 13th. They didn't go away when COVID came.
Thank you. We actually have a question that's related to this response. And the question is, could we get a public hearing on the ban treaty before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development? And could the Bloc and the NDP use one of their opposition days to make the UN ban treaty the agenda for an opposition day? Very specific question.
Well, we have done it before. We have made it one of our opposition days before. I know that Alexis and I are both new, so I don't think we're the ones that actually get to make the final decisions of what our opposition days are. I wish, but certainly those are options, and we certainly could bring these things forward. We do need support because the Bloc and the NDP we do need some support from the other parties because of just the way the numbers fall. Until we get elected or the Bloc gets elected, and then of course we'll make sure it's one of our days.
Or we get 12. As soon as we get 12, we can promise you that'll happen.
Well, we cannot promise that because, you know, let's be realistic for one thing. The topic we are discussing tonight, we have the pandemic right now, and obviously all the days of opposition, it's difficult, you know, to bring that topic in. So we have to be realistic. We don't know how much time this government will stand. That's another thing. So I don't know, I cannot promise this, but it's a pretty good idea, but short term, I don't think it's gonna happen.
Setsuko, I was wondering, I thought I saw your hand up. And any time that you want to interject, I thought I saw your hand up. If you wanted to answer, yes. Okay, all right. The next question that I have is from Susan O'Donnell, and her question is, the Liberal government has started to fund the expansion of nuclear energy in Canada with their program for so-called small modular nuclear reactors. Can anyone on the panel speak to the link between the civilian nuclear industry and the production of nuclear weapons? Elizabeth.
Yeah, and thank you. Susan's doing great work in New Brunswick to fight this. We've got this nonsense of small modular reactors as though this is somehow, I don't know how it differs from any other nuclear technology in terms of creating high-level nuclear waste, as well as, of course, perpetuating the nuclear industry. And the nuclear industry is inherently linked to the nuclear arms race. And so we absolutely oppose any reliance on nuclear energy. The nuclear industry is trying to dress itself up as a climate savior. They try this all the time. I'm old enough to remember when the nuclear industry thought it was the solution to acid rain. They've been trying for years to make a dying industry some hope for the future. So yes, please stay vigilant on this. We are seeing public money going into an unproven technology that's made to sound somehow safe and interesting to us. We must continue to oppose the nuclear industry in all its forms.
Thank you. So the next question we have is a bit of a technical one, and it's around the TPNW. Are there any mechanisms in the treaty when it comes into effect that can be used to force Canada to join? Legal chamber, perhaps, asks the question.
No, there is not. I'm sorry, but well, I think that's the simple answer.
It's not, and there certainly is not a way that the three of us can make that happen.
Thank you for your clarity.
Well, then, there's nothing in the language of the treaty, and that's the case for all treaties. You know, you can only, you have to sign it, your parliament has to ratify it, then you're part of a treaty. There's no treaty mechanism that could force non-compliant parties into joining, unfortunately. So what we do need to do, though, is I do think we need to promote multilateralism. We need to talk about, we need to defeat something that did not used to exist. When I was your age, Bianca, there were no Canadians who thought the UN was an evil thing. I don't think there was one, right? And now we're getting a lot of US propaganda. You know, the people who want to be anti-maskers, they're also probably against the United Nations. People who think Agenda 21 was an evil plot to end poverty all around the world. Well, it was a plot to end poverty all around the world, but that's a good goal. So we need to call these things out.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question we have is directed at Heather. And the question is, I wish you or someone from the NDP would come out about moving Canada's excessive military spending to human security and urgent social and environmental programs. Canada spends $31 billion on the military, $2 billion for global affairs, $5 billion for foreign aid, and $1.8 billion for environment and climate change. This is a huge problem.
Yeah, well, and I can tell you, I'm going to try to answer a couple questions because I see another one on there that's directed at me as well. So first of all, in terms of that, the answer to that is I actually brought that up in the Foreign Affairs Committee just today. Like literally, right before this, we were talking to Bob Ray and Mr. Ray and to Mr. Beasley from the World Food Program, and I actually quoted Doug Roach, who is a stupendous participant on today's call. I quoted his comments on how we could support sustainable development goals and the SDGs if we weren't committing so much to military. So actually that just happened hours ago. It's been a busy day, it feels like. A lot's been going on. So I will continue to push that. Obviously, it is abhorrent that Canada has the lowest level of official development assistance in the history of our country, at the same time that we're increasing our investment in arms. It is gross. We see it in arms. We also see it in a number of different areas. You know, I have been in communities where our mining corporations are smacking up against our aid development. Like there is a lot to unpack in terms of how far we've fallen in terms of our commitment to global poverty reduction, food security, women and girls. The other issue that I'll just touch on too is that one of the questions was something about what is the NDP doing to help to move this forward, I guess. And like I said in my comments, I come from a long line of NDPers who've been pushing on this, Paul Dewar and Linda Duncan, Ellen Laverdiere, but Randall Garrison, who's still in our caucus, actually did sponsor, he plans to do quite a lot of work on NATO, and he did sponsor a resolution in 2018. We have brought it forward. There's been a number of actions that we've done. Linda and Ellen signed the Basel Appeal for Disarmament and Sustainable Security in January, so 2019, I guess, so one more year ago. So there has been a number of key pieces that the NDP have tried to get the government to move on, and I know that's also the case with Elizabeth and with Alexis and the Bloc as well. That was a very fast sort of response, trying to wrap up two questions in one. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question from Karen Harrison, who says, on January 22nd, 2021, there should be a press conference on Parliament Hill, or a major press conference with Setsuko Thurlow, and the Prime Minister should be asked questions from the media at this time and asked why he is so slow. So to formulate that as a question, I'm going to ask you all what you think about that proposal.
Fortunately, the House isn't sitting that day, so we can't bring anything up in the House.
All right, and
but a press conference is a great idea. We have to mark January 22nd, 2021, so that Canadian media notice that a treaty has come into legal effect with us sitting on the outside of it. And I do want to mention the importance, we've mentioned people in other parties, we need to stress that Hedy Fry isn't the only one in the Liberal caucus. There are people, and I think many people on this call through their networks will know the kind of people I'm thinking about who should be speaking up behind closed doors in that Liberal caucus to say it's time for us to sign the treaty.
And I think it's important to recognize too, Elizabeth, that while Hedy was not able to be here because of a prior commitment, that there are, you know, around 150 options, alternatives that could have come and represented if that was a decision they wanted to make.
I'm with you, Heather. You're absolutely right to call that out. I mean, I don't know that, I mean, I don't want to set, call Hedy's excuse for not being here today into question, but I don't imagine that the Liberal government would appreciate having Liberal MPs speak out against the policy that they currently have been defending in Parliament for years now. But there are good people inside every party. Certainly. And we need to encourage them, as opposed to, we just need to get them to stand up on their own hind legs in their own caucuses and say, enough of this. We need to sign the treaty.
Especially, there are good people, especially in the Green Party caucus. There's a lot of good people there. And I wanted to add that it's very important, that press conference, so we have to relay that on all of our networks, I think. I think it's a great idea.
And I see a good comment there from our dear friend Mary Lou McPhedran, Senator McPhedran. There are a lot of really, now the Senate is a different animal than it used to be. It's full of increasing appointments of independents, people who come from backgrounds in civil society, Indigenous leaders, and people from the women's movement, to mention an obvious one with Mary Lou. So we should be able to maybe get something started on the Senate side.
Thank you. So the next question is, when the pandemic hit, Canadians had no idea what the plan was to deal with it, and the government scrambled. What is the plan if one of our major cities is hit with a nuclear weapon? This is a known threat. What will the government response be to deal with the terrible consequences of this? Pretty bad.
It reminds me of course, the Beyond the Fringe, I think it was. It said, after nuclear holocaust, we'll be operating with something of a skeleton staff. I mean, there are no plans for what you do after nuclear holocaust. We can't even begin to imagine allowing it to happen ever again. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Setsuko, for the horrors of that. We must never imagine it happening, because there isn't recovery. It's just as Alexei said, it's a permanent stain on humanity.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And so the last question that I have is just a very general question, which is what are the parties? What can the parties do to work together to move towards the signing of the UN nuclear ban?
Well, you know, we've been working together. I mean, I can work with Heather. I can work with Elizabeth. We don't have problems working together. We proved that at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if you remember. It's, you know, in March. It looks like 10 years ago, but it was 8 months ago. We all worked together, all the parties, because there was an emergency. See, but then when we're talking about this topic, people don't think it's an emergency, but it is one. Like the climate crisis is an emergency, and we have to work together. But maybe other parties don't see it as an emergency. That's our work. We have to do the work to prove them there is an emergency, because we've seen it's possible when they think it's an emergency, everybody works together. Mm-hmm. So that's our work to prove them that there is an emergency and we have to work together. So we have to do the work. Heather has to do the work. Elizabeth, me, we have to do the work to convince them that there is an emergency right now.
Well, and just I would add to that I think, je étudie français pour travailler avec Alex. So I'm working hard so I can learn my French to work with Alex. But you know, Senator McPhedran has brought this forward. I know Senator Simons, this is an issue for her. There are a number of ways we can work together, and maybe I could propose that maybe we should be co-hosting a press moment on the 22nd, and maybe that is our next step that we can do together.
Thank you.
I'm in.
Setsuko, there's a question for you before we kind of round this all out, which is just, it's a question from from a young activist who wants to know, like, what can they do to take up arms, not to take up arms, to take down arms, and to join this struggle and to be effective, with you as an inspiration.
The young people are asking what
the young people want to know what are some ways to get involved and to work towards abolition of nuclear weapons?
Yes, that's the like yeah. To all the groups I visit here in Canada, as well as in Japan or in Europe, was asking, what can I do? Well, I suggest to them the first thing is the issue. You have to know, we have to know what we're talking about. So read and think and imagine and talk to people around you, maybe your teachers and friends and your families. And in churches, there are teachers, somebody you can trust who could help you. You know, form the group, get the foundation, that is knowledge and information. Once you think you know what you think about this issue, then start especially to the politician. Those MPs are supposed to be our spokesperson in the parliament. So start talking to them, start writing to them, and let them get busy in the house, in the parliament. They have to be debaters themselves and keep pressuring them for them to do that. And then they have to pressure the minister to take leadership in this. Of course, we can write directly to the Prime Minister. I think we just have to all kinds of pressure. But first we have to know what we're talking about. That's what I say to young people. But in order to do that, lots of groups in your town and cities, look around and find the group you want to join. And in business, you can't work alone. You need a colleague to work with. So those are the simple suggestions. Like, learn the issue first, then act. Don't stop there, keep acting for years, and you don't know when we achieve the final goal, but we don't give up. We keep pushing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for that call to action. I just put a link to foreignpolicy.ca/nuclear ban, because there you can find the list of 50+ groups that endorse this. They're all working very hard for peace, tirelessly. So please educate yourselves, as Setsuko said, is the first stage, but then get active, right? Because none of these things are given to us. You know, we have to make them happen. And it's us at civil society that does that. So before we end, I'd love to just hear any last words from our panelists before we say good night this evening. So Alexei, do you have any last thoughts for our audience?
Well, that's how politics should work. Different party with different view on many subject, but where we can be united for one thing, one good thing. It's about good and bad, and I think we have it's obvious that we're on the good side right now, and we can be united. We can work together. We have to. We don't. Sorry. Sometimes my English is. I'm gonna be better. I promise. Sometimes it's easy to judge people. I think we do not have to judge people. I mean, I'm talking about liberals and conservative. We don't have to judge people. We have to convince them. This is a different thing. And I'm sure all MPs wants the best for their citizens. So, and I know we have the best arguments. So working together as we did tonight, I think we're gonna make it real, and we're gonna reach our goals. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here tonight, and I promise you that my English will be better next time.
Thank you, Alexei. Heather.
I almost want to just let the words of Ms. Thurlow end our session, of course, because they were very powerful. But I agree with Alexi that we will work together. My French will get better next time. We'll do this in a fully bilingual manner. But I also want to say thank you. This empowers us. These moments where we come together and we spend time with our colleagues talking about our shared commitment to this. It empowers us. It makes us remember how important it is that we put in the time to do this work. One thing I just wanted to add, I just noticed there are tons of questions that did not get answered tonight, and as is always the way, of course. If people have any questions, I know there were some specifically for me. If anyone has any questions they'd like to send, I'm sure my colleagues or me, feel free to email. We'll always respond. We'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. Merci particulièrement à mon collègue Alexis qui parle très bien anglais, avec une approche tellement agréable. So look, for me, I just want to say I'm looking at the chat box. I'm seeing that our hero, Tamara Lawrence, who always does such good work for peace, has mentioned there's a Facebook session. Is there a Facebook session that's going to be looking at the arms trade show that's happening in Halifax? Dorothy Golden Rosenberg is reminding me to remind everyone to make sure that you've seen the classic film, If You Love This Planet, Helen Caldicott's film, which incredibly, it was that film that allowed me to first get to know Seth Klein when he was 16, and they took it to they took it all around the country in the SAGE tour. Some of you will remember that, the Stop Global Extermination tour of young people who are now in their 40s, I guess. So a lot of us here have been in this movement a long time. It is really important to encourage young people. It's really important to get this generation of Fridays for the Future climate strikers to understand and to support the significant goals for global survival, which have to be climate justice and have to be nuclear disarmament, and that it is something we talk about. That is the number one way to get politicians to move, is that it's talked about in local media, it's in the newspapers, it's in letters to the editor sections, and we work on it together. And we will do a press conference January 22nd. For now, in absence of anyone else putting their hands up, let's just say we're going to do it. And we're going to include our friends in this on the other side of Parliament in the Senate, and we'll figure it out. It may be the biggest press conference on Zoom that's ever happened.
We're going to hold you to that. Sitsuko, would you like to say anything?
Yes, before we adjourn this, I'd like to ask a question and want to get your opinion. Well, I am so concerned our effort with the government is remain one way. I'd like to see mutual out. We'd like to hear from the government what the policies are, what the actions are, what the programs are. We don't hear that at all. Well, I have many peace activist colleagues in Japan, and when I listen to them, maybe that could work. Well, they wanted a better communication between the government and NGOs. So NGO requested the government, Foreign Affairs Department, to have the face-to-face contact, representatives of the NGO coalition. And that's been happening for about 10 years. Once or twice a year, the official from the Foreign Affairs meet with those activists, local level. They come to Tokyo and they meet. But this is a huge land from Atlantic to Pacific. I guess it's impossible for them to come to Ottawa. But if only Ministry of Global Affairs, the appropriate, if somebody from that ministry could visit West Coast, East Coast, somewhere in between, and a direct communication with the local groups. Here in Toronto area, we have about 50 groups at tonight's event. I'm sure there would be tremendous response if we have a meeting with somebody from foreign affairs, global affairs, give us up-to-date information where the government is at, how the local grassroots groups can work together. I think that would benefit mutually. Is it a crazy idea? It's been working in Japan. If the people who are listening to this program feel it's a good idea, well, let's talk about it. Unless we have some kind of structure, system, we remain isolated. This is a huge country, I'm finding. We don't have strong, powerful enough communication with peace groups. What do you think? Do you think it's a possibility? Or is that too expensive to employ another official and to send that person from coast to coast? Well, I think it's worth it. We'd like to see more louder dialogue between the government and people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing that. And if any of our MPs have anything they'd like to say in response to that, I think that would be a great place for us to end the evening.
I don't think it's too crazy at all. I think it's something we're happy to look at and happy to take forward. Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm so grateful for such a lively discussion. It feels really historic in many ways to just have brought you all together, feeling really good about the conversation that was had today. And I know I personally learned a lot as well. Thank you, Setsuko. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Alexi. Thank you for sharing your insights and your knowledge and your passion. And also to the audience for your brilliant questions. I'm sorry that we did not get to all of them, just time did not allow. I also want to thank all of the endorsing organizations. There's so many of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for getting behind this event. I want to thank the Hiroshima Nagasaki Day Coalition, Science for Peace, Les Artistes pour la Paix, Peace Quest, Canadian Dimension, just for the incredible work that all of these groups have done to make this event a reality. Please find out more about all of these groups, support them, educate yourself, as Setsuko said, call upon our representatives to represent us and to make that change happen, and let's stay active on this issue. You can also find out more about the Canadian Foreign Policy's call for a fundamental reassessment of Canadian foreign policy at foreignpolicy.ca. I wish you all a good evening. That's it for our program today. Thank you so much. Thank you.